Now I'm going to show you how to replace your rear pads and rotors on a 02 to 06 Nissan Altima. Should be about the same whether you got the 4-cylinder like mine is, automatic or manual, or the V6 model. Also, it's probably going to be pretty much the same for later years. This one specifically is an 06 though, so we know this will work for 02 to 06, but it'll probably work for later years as well. If you want to see the Mustang, make sure you check out the Mustang playlist on the channel. I got tons of videos on that car and modifying it and doing a little bit of work to it. Same goes for the Altima. Done some performance modifications of this. If you want to check that out, check out the Altima playlist. I'm going to go do the other side. I just finished this side because I actually just did the rear wheel bearing hub, so that video will be in the playlist also should you need that. But I'm going to swap around this other side here and show you guys how to do it. Alright, so I loosened all my lug nuts about one turn on the ground before I lifted it any. So I got it up secure on a jack stand. I like to leave my jack under it just for extra assurance. All the lug nuts removed, so now you remove your wheel. A lot of times they stick. That one was pretty easy. Sometimes you give them a little kick, they'll come off. If not, you can hit the back side of the rim of the wheel with a wooden block and a mallet, or just a rubber mallet, and they'll pop off. Alright, so if you're replacing just the rotor, then you'll just take this, the whole caliper with the bracket off here, and it's this bolt and then the bolt down there. However, if you're replacing the rotor, chances are your new one's going to be a little thicker, so you might have some clearance issues, but as long as it's in between the pads, but as long as it's not too bad, you should be able to still get it over. Otherwise, you'll have to separate the caliper itself via these two bolts, so that you can depress your piston to clear the new rotor. But I'm doing pads and rotors, so we're going to do both. So first, I'm going to take the caliper off because I'm going to need it off to get the pads out, and then I'm going to take my bracket off so that I can get the rotor off. Now if you're just doing pads, then all you need to do is take the caliper off here from these two bolts, put in your new pads, depress the piston, put it back on, you're good to go. Alright, so the caliper mounting bolts here, they are 14 millimeter for me. This one's kind of a pain because, as you can see, you can't really get a socket and a ratchet over it. So then you would think to use a wrench, right? Well, these are so tight, for me at least, on mine, being driven in Ohio winters and it's all rusty and whatnot. The 12 point on this wrench is trying to, on the other side I did round it. It rounded the bolt because you really want a 6 point like that, get a good grip on it, that way you don't round the bolt head. So if you use a wrench, be careful. If it's too tight, it feels like it's starting to round it. That's kind of a loose fit too. Maybe a tighter fitting wrench would work better because my socket fits much more snugly. But make sure either your wrench fits real snug, or what you'll have to do is loosen the top bolt of the bracket here, and then loosen your bottom, well, take out your bottom bolt, and these are 3/4 by the way. That way you can spin this up out of the way of this so you can actually get a socket on it. See, so the top one's just loosened a little, the bottom one's out. That way I was able to pivot this up, and now I can get my 6 point on there. So the other thing you can do, I can't really hold this down and get that at the same time, so I'm going to have an assistant hold the brake so it'll clamp against this rotor here. That way I can break that free without it sliding up. If you've already done the other side, then you want to stay tuned to the end where I'm going to go over, you don't want to just like stomp on the brake after you push one of these pistons back in, so make sure you stay tuned till the end of that. So I'm going to go ahead and do all that and fix the other side. That way I can go ahead and press this and have them hold it so I can break that bolt free. Alright, so I got it loose using that method. I would only just loosen it because this is trying to pull the whole caliper this way. so it's going to be difficult to loosen it while somebody's standing on the brakes. So just enough to loosen it, then sling it back down, put that bolt back in, and then you can get your regular wrench on here and get it out the rest of the way without having to worry about rounding off the head. Now again, that's if your guys' is super tight, because mine are. Like, even though it's backed out a considerable amount, on the other side they're all rusty and nasty, so they're pretty much shot. If your caliper's in better shape, it might not be an issue for you. But see, yeah, it's even like halfway out and it's still fighting me, so they're pretty nasty. So I did that to make sure I didn't round off the head, because mine are really tight. Now they only back out so far, which just so happens to be about that far. And then they'll just keep spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, so they're completely detached. And then what you do is pull them out. Now see, that's still pretty nasty, but I had this issue on the other side. They're so gunked up. This one's way easier for me to remove than this one. They just keep spinning and spinning, and then you pull them out. But these ones are in such bad shape that I have to pull really freaking hard to get them out. Not on that one, but on this bottom one I'm definitely going to have to. So what you can do is, while you're spinning it, push on the back side with a flathead screwdriver, put pressure against it, and then it might spin out like that as you turn it. Or you're going to have to lock onto it with like some channel locks or something, and wiggle and pull back real hard at the same time to get it out if it's fighting you. Or you may not have that issue. It just depends on what kind of condition yours is in. That's the other thing too, is this bar is in the way. You can't get this one out. It hits here. And same thing for reinstalling. I ran into this on the other side. You can't get it in or out without loosening that bolt and pivoting it up past that point. So there's that also. So this one's really fighting me. I cannot get it out. I've got it pried back a few more millimeters, trying to get a pry bar in there and a screwdriver like that and pull it out, and I've been working on it with this. It's just real stiff and gunked up in there. So at this point, the caliper should definitely probably be replaced. But yeah, you should definitely consider replacing them if they're that nasty. Like I said, I pulled the other side out and they're pretty nasty, and you can see from this one that it's seen better days. The other side was worse, but this bottom one's definitely going to be worse whenever I eventually get it out. So you would definitely want to consider replacing the calipers at this point. But with that being said, my system's been working flawless. I just was putting new brakes all the way around. But I'm going to get these out of here and get them cleaned up and lubed up real good like I did the other side, and then it'll probably perform better. Alright, so with this pickle fork or ball joint tool, whatever you want to call it, and my mini sledge here, a couple good whacks, and I got this out further about as far as I can. I reinstalled the bracket bolts a few turns, where you can use a slide punch like this, something big and heavy, to put a lot of smack down on that, for lack of better terms. So now I got it further out, so I'm gonna undo that bolt and spin it up and see if I can get it out the rest of the way. Also, while you're in here removing these bolts, be careful on your brake hose here and your brake line. You don't want to dent that, and you don't want to whack that too hard, or you can collapse it internally and then your brakes will stick. Alright, so I slid it up so it's clear, held it in place with my slide punch here, and with that pickle fork again, punched it out the rest of the way. So yeah, it's just real nice, dry, rusty, and tacky, so I'm definitely going to grease that up for it to go back in. Same with the top, although the top wasn't as bad. Shouldn't lay them in crap like that, but they're kind of beyond the point of no return, so I don't really care at the moment. So with those bolts out, your caliper will slide out here. It's kind of hard with one hand. So there's your caliper. Usually I put a center block here to set it on, because you don't want to let it hang from that line. You also don't want to twist it too much, or you can pinch it, which can damage it. And also, if you're still hammering around on here, which we're going to be to do this, you know, it could, wherever you set it, it could fall, so just be careful. So then if you're just changing your pads at that point, you can change your pads now. You can knock these out, install the new ones, install your new hardware or whatever. These are really seized up on here. Experienced the same thing with the other side. The hardware locks them in place and keeps them from falling out, and it's supposed to be nice, smooth, polished and all that, so that they slide freely. But that's not the case here, and my new ones did not come with new hardware. So what I'm doing, and what I did on the other side, I'm polishing them up where the pad sits, with my Dremel and a little wire brush so that they're not so freaking seized up. But ideally you should replace the hardware, but mine didn't come with any, so I don't have that option. So there's a look at your bracket and how your pads go in, how the hardware sets. And you can actually slide these in from either side, and it's close here, but they will fit either side. So if one side's giving you trouble trying to get it in, then try the other side. So if you're replacing the rotor, now comes the fun of trying to beat the rotor off. So you pop your little plug out here, and this acts as a drum right here for your e-brake. That's separate pads for the emergency brake, and they expand on the inside of that drum, and that's how it works, whether you have automatic like this one or a manual. So inside of there is a little gear, and you'll turn it one way to retract the pads so they don't stick and you can get this off, and you turn them the other way to bring them out closer to the surface. So I'm going to find that, do that, loosen it. Once I get this off of here, then I'll give you a better look at it. But after loosening that, you pretty much just got to hammer around on the drum of this thing to try to get it off. Typically, usually pretty hard. Be extremely careful not to hit your studs. If you nick one of those or mushroom the head or mess up the threads, then you won't be able to get your lug nut back on. So kind of just hit it all around like this, and then in between all these on the face, just all around until it pops free, which will take considerable force usually.
Also, you should definitely wear safety glasses while doing this. I have had stuff come back and hit me in the face before.
Alright, I just saw it break free there. Okay. So then there's the little gear I was talking about. If you turn it up, it'll retract these. If you turn it down, it brings them out. We'll talk more about that after we get the new rotor on. So you try not to touch those e-brake pads or mess with them, because they kind of wiggle up and down and left and right and all kinds, because they're just kind of on there by springs. And then if you mess up the alignment, then they'll drag, and it might be difficult to get your rotor back on. So anyways, if you only turn that a couple times like I did, I just went and that was about it. It's normal to hear something like that, because like a part of the pad will just barely be touching the drum somewhere, and that's fine, because that's normality. Same with these pads. It's always constantly barely in contact with the rotor. So if you have an auto and you just flip that once or twice, you don't really got to worry about anything. You can just leave it there. They're supposed to be self-adjusting. If they're really old and rusty, then they don't exactly do that too well or at all, as is the case with this one. But you know, in an auto, you don't really use the e-brake, so it's not really a big deal. But if you have a manual transmission, then you use the e-brake constantly. At which point with that one, then you would want to give it about the same amount of turns the opposite direction, which would be down to bring them out, as you did inward to get the old one off. That way your e-brake cable remains the same. Otherwise, if you leave it like that, then you're going to have to pull your e-brake further to get it to engage. So, with that being said, once you do that, you can kind of just turn it and keep going like this. As long as it's still fairly easy to turn, then you're good. And once you go so far, it'll kind of, it'll be like either stop on you or be real hard to turn. At that point, you just give it like one flick past that, make sure it's good to go, and then that's about where you would want it with the, well, regardless, but especially if you're setting it up for a manual transmission. So I'm just going to stick a screwdriver on them, something like that, and then tap on it with a hammer in the opposite direction, get them to pop out for each one of these. But you might have to pry and hammer with a little bit. Alright, so I got them knocked out. So like I said, my hardware, well, I didn't get any new hardware, so I'm going to have to reuse the old, and these pads are really sticking in there because you can see how nasty that is. So I'm going to pop these out. Just pull down on them, pop them out. Be careful not to cut your finger because this metal's sharp. And then I'm going to polish the surface with my Dremel and wire brush wheel so that they'll slide in and out of there more easily. Not only just so they're easier to install, but it's just so the braking system will work correctly. That way they don't stick. Well, by the way, the rotors I buy, they're zinc plated and they're dry, but a lot of stuff, especially if you get them from the auto parts store, they have like a tacky grease coating on it, and you'll need to clean that off on both sides thoroughly first with brake parts cleaner and a rag, or yeah, your brakes are going to be smoking going down the road and not work. Also, don't touch the surfaces with your nasty fingers, or it'll kind of do the same thing. So you can see there, it's pretty shiny. I cleaned it up a decent amount with my Dremel, as I said, because they're all super nasty. So that'll help them not only go in a little more easily, but that wasn't my concern. My concern is that they're not sticking once I hit the brake and it depresses, and then I let go, and then they don't let go because they're sticking in that crap. So like I said, install new hardware if you can. Mine didn't come with any, so that's what I did. Depending on what you purchased, sometimes the pads will have a squealer, which is this thing right here on both sides, and this that little tab there. Basically, it'll touch your rotor once your pad gets so low, and it'll make that famous squealing sound, and that's an indication that, hey, you need to replace your pads because they're low. So that's what that is. If you got one on all your pads, then you don't need to worry about the orientation. But with some kits, which is the case with the one I got here, they only come with one for each side. And so you'll put that on the back side, because on a single piston brake like this, the back side will wear faster than the front. So you put the squealer pad on the back. So when you reinstall them, you got to get them in those little brackets, and as you can see, this one is making contact with that one down there. So this is where it's kind of a pain in the butt. Like this one is catching there on the hardware, so then like I'll tap it in away from the part it's catching on, and then inward at the same time. So kind of 45-degree angle with a screwdriver on there with a hammer, and you need to get them in to those channels there a little bit. So this one's not quite fully installed yet, so it's sitting there because of those tabs, and it's not going anywhere, but it's not fully installed yet. And you need to get it past that lip and in that lip, because otherwise when you go to press the brakes, they might jam up on you. Alright, so I got both my pads installed just far enough, so it gives me plenty of clearance in here from my rotor. This is going to be your orientation here. So the bend of the pad there, the outside bend, will follow the bend of the rotor. It goes like that. Alright, so then you just slide it over, and then I'm going to hand start this top bolt. Okay, now the reason we just hand started this top one is because remember, this bolt here, see, it's hitting that, so we'll need to spin this up to get that in there. So I got that one started. Then we get the caliper over this. Now see, I got this gap here, so at this point you might have to tap them in a little bit. I wouldn't say make it super tight against the rotor. You might have to, I like to use a flathead here and there to go back and forth to drive them in. So I got to get them in far enough so I can get my caliper over, which brings me to my next point. You got to get a C-clamp on this and push your piston in to make clearance for the new thicker pads and rotor. So you just set your C-clamp up on it like that. Now, because this one's so small, that's all I need to do. You can put an old pad in there to help get good even pressure on there, but this one's so small, being a rear caliper, that I don't need to do that. So you just hook it on like that, and then just slowly twist that to press the piston in until it stops. And while you do this, you want to take your brake fluid reservoir cap off. Okay, so it'll let the air out, and it'll also alleviate some of the pressure for you depressing that piston back in. Alright, so my piston's fully depressed. So now I can put this back on here. If it clears, which surprisingly it does, even though these pads are still pretty far out from the rotor. But if it doesn't, then you just have to tap these pads in enough so that you can get your caliper over. And now we need to align these boots here without ripping them off like I'm trying to do there. You got to kind of squeeze them down under there, spin it up on. Same for the bottom one. Get that aligned, and then you can put your slide bolts back in. I'm gonna go clean these up a little bit and put some grease on them first though, and get those lined up. Get them back in there, top and bottom. And I noticed this on both sides. I thought maybe the other side was broken, but these are actually different, top and bottom. The bottom one is this one here. Sorry, it won't focus. And the top one's that one that has that like nipple thing on it. So pay attention when you take them out. If they're different, make sure you put them back in the right spot. So that one went on top for me, this one on bottom. I remember we had to spin this bottom up a little, get that one in. And then also, there we go. Now also, if that rubber, if you get it pinched in there, it's in the way, that bolt's going to catch that rubber and it's not going to want to go in. So I'm going to get these spun down, then I'll slip this back down. Well, I guess I can do that now. Let me get these bolts back in. The smaller caliper bolts, the torque spec on that is about 25, 28 foot-pounds of torque, and these larger ones back here, you want to torque these to 38 foot-pounds of torque. Alright, so I got everything torqued back down. Don't forget to stick your rubber plug back in there so moisture and shit doesn't get in there. I'm ready to put my wheel back on now. Alright, you want to throw your wheel back on here before it touches the ground. I try to torque it down as much as I can while it's still airborne. That way when I drop the weight on the car, the weight of the car on the wheel, it doesn't go cockeyed. So you want to torque this down in 3 steps, getting progressively tighter. I like to go to a final value on most passenger cars, about 90 foot-pounds of torque. You can go 100 if you want. But do a crisscross pattern. So on a 5-lug, that's pretty easy to follow star pattern. Okay, so don't go like here, here, here. Like, don't ever follow one in order. Go crisscross star pattern. So I'll do like 30 foot-pounds of torque first set, 60 foot-pounds of torque, 90 foot-pounds of torque, and then I'll recheck them all. And as I said, I get as much as I can while it's sitting up in the air. I usually sit down and put my foot against it or under it, or, well, yeah, you probably shouldn't put your foot under it, but press against it like that, try to get as much torque as I can. Then I'll take the stand out and I'll lower just enough weight on it to keep it from turning, and then get the rest of my torque before I drop all the weight of the car on it. And again, that's to keep it from going cockeyed. So when you put brand new brakes on here, it's actually really important. It's a common misconception, the warped rotors. That's actually how you get warped rotor symptom. Because if your wheel doesn't go on perfectly flush and it's cockeyed, then that'll actually allow your rotor to wobble because it's cockeyed also. And it'll wobble in between your pads, and that's how you get hot spots that way. And that's how you get that pulsating warped rotor symptom in your brake pedal. So if you don't want that to happen to your brand new brakes, then I highly suggest you torque in 3 or 4 steps in the crisscross pattern, and without the full weight of the car on it. All right, so once you're done with that, make sure you put your cap back on. All right, so here's the part I was talking about earlier with not just stomping on your brakes right away. Let me get the keys out here. All right, so start the car. Okay. All right, turn this radio off. So remember, you depressed your piston, so your brake piston is all the way out. So now there's a bunch of space and a bunch of void it's got to make up when you press down your brake pedal to bring it back out and bring everything flush with the rotors again. You want to be careful doing this. Some cars, if you just, for one, if you take off and drive right now, you go to hit the pedal, it's going to go almost to the floor because it's got to make up all that space. And if you allow that to happen, some cars, they have sensors and valves and whatnot in the braking system that it'll think that you blew a brake line if that happens, and then it'll divert pressure from either to the front or rear, depending on which one it's reading that did that. And it'll basically lock out either the front or rear set of brakes. I've had it happen before. And then typically it's a real pain in the butt to get it to reset, or you got to take it in and have them reset it with a pressurized system. So what you want to do, press it lightly, slowly, no more than halfway down, however many times it takes. It could take only 3 or 4 times. It could take 30 times. It depends on how much you depress those pistons and whatnot. So, you know, let's say if I get it done in 4 pushes, don't be surprised if it takes you 40, okay? So I can feel mine already firmed back up, so I'm good to go now. But make sure you do that instead of just driving off and go and stomp on your brakes, because you could lock out part of your brakes. Well, plus that, and you're not going to have any freaking brakes. So after that, you're good to go. So if this video helped you out, please hit that like button for me. Like I said, if you want to see anything else on the Altima, check out the Altima playlist. Appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.